snow fell in crystalline patterns, too perfect to be natural, as Dmitri and I watched the research facility from our vantage point in the skeletal winter forest. My breath clouded in front of my face, each exhale taking longer to dissipate than the last. The cold here felt wrong, deeper than mere temperature, as if it reached past flesh and bone to touch something essential within. The facility masqueraded as a weather station, all utilitarian concrete and rust-streaked metal, but the guards gave it away. They wore maintenance uniforms that didn't quite fit, their movements too practiced, too alert. 4 cameras swept the perimeter in overlapping arcs, while 3 pairs of guards walked measured patterns that only looked random. Dog's head snapped toward the facility's eastern corner. A guard stumbled mid-stride, catching himself against a wall. Even at this distance, I could see the unnatural rigidity in his movements, like a puppet with frozen joints. His breath came out black in the cold air. "The sickness spreads," Dmitri said, "like before." The guard's lips moved in shapes that weren't words, at least not any language meant for human tongues. Dog growled, low and continuous. We waited through the morning, watching the shift changes. With each passing hour, more guards showed signs, nosebleeds that froze black before hitting the ground, eyes that reflected light at impossible angles, movements that suggested their bones weren't quite where they should be. At noon, opportunity came with chaos. 3 guards collapsed simultaneously, their screams cutting off with the sharp crack of freezing air. In the confusion, Dmitri led us to a service entrance, half hidden by storage containers. The door's lock had been deliberately damaged, its internal mechanism crushed rather than picked. Dog sniffed the handle and recoiled, showing teeth. Inside, emergency lights cast sickly shadows through hallways that smelled of ozone and old fear. Security panels hung dark and dead on the walls, their circuits burned out. A piece of paper fluttered in a non-existent breeze, pinned under an empty coffee cup. The handwriting was spidery, desperate. "Too late for me. See everything," Dmitri translated unnecessarily. Sokolov's writing. The facility's layout followed Soviet-era efficiency, all right angles and numbered doors. In a room marked environmental analysis, a child's doll sat on a metal table. Ice, black as starless space, crept across its plastic skin, spreading like reaching fingers. The sight hit me like a physical blow. Memories of another doll, another time. Morgan? Dmitri's voice seemed to come from very far away. I forced air into lungs that felt crystallized. Keep moving. The main laboratory was a collision of science and superstition. Modern measuring equipment shared space with ritual circles scratched into the floor. Computers sat dark and dead, their screens cracked in identical patterns that formed symbols I recognized from Maria's books. Only the analog devices still functioned. Mercury thermometers, pressure gauges, wind meters. All showed impossible readings. In the archives, decades of research spilled across desks and floors. Sokolov's notes revealed an obsession spanning continents, disappearances in Siberian mountains, strange deaths in the Alps, entire expeditions vanishing in the Andes. All followed patterns I'd seen in the morgue, and in the photos Elena had shown me of her brother. A circular room deep in the facility's heart bore Mansi symbols carved into every surface. A video setup in the corner held dozens of labeled tapes. I chose one at random and fed it into a battery-powered player Dmitri produced from his pack. Sokolov's face filled the small screen, aged beyond his years. Day 47 of containment experiments. The entity responds to traditional Mansi binding rituals. but the effect is temporary. Modern methods prove worse than useless. Electronic equipment fails, as if the cold itself rejects technology. The old ways. He looked over his shoulder at something off-screen. The old ways had purpose. They knew. They always knew. The basement level hit us with a wall of cold that made the surface feel tropical. A bank of monitors showed feeds from across the village, including 3 angles of Nikolai's house. Most screens showed only static, but one displayed a real-time graph of temperature fluctuations on the mountain. The line dropped steadily, far below what any thermometer should register. Dog's growl drew us to a hidden door behind a bookcase. The room beyond held an altar black with ritual ice, symbols matching the victim's wounds pulsing with soft, cold light. Papers scattered around it showed Sokolov's increasingly frantic notes, but with an undertone of purpose. He'd meant us to find this. Dawn painted the observation post windows with false warmth as we watched Sokolov trudge through the strange snow toward the facility. He moved like a man underwater, his skin bearing traceries of black frost. Our eyes met across the distance, and I saw recognition there. Not of me, but of something he saw in me. Something that made him smile with teeth that gleamed like ice. "He's not working alone," Dmitri said, as Sokolov disappeared inside. "The security, the equipment, the monitoring. This is bigger than one obsessed scientist." I thought of the cameras watching Nikolai's house, of Elena's ransacked apartment, of all the pieces slowly shifting into place like a vast and terrible puzzle. "No," I agreed, my right hand trembling with more than cold. "This is just the surface. Something's coming. Something that's been waiting a very long time." The snow fell harder, each flake a perfect black crystal, carrying reflections of things that existed somewhere far colder than Earth had ever known. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing ancient symbols carved into the cave walls. Sokolov's footprints in the frost led deeper into the mountain's heart. Dog pressed against my leg, his fur bristling. "These markings," Dmitri said, his scarred face harsh in the artificial light. "They match the texts Maria showed us." I ran my fingers over the worn stone. The symbols felt cold, unnaturally so, as if they'd been carved in ice rather than rock. My right hand trembled at the contact, and I quickly shoved it into my pocket. "Your wife studied these caves?" I asked, watching Dmitri's reaction. His weather-beaten features tightened. "Yes, she was careful, methodical, always marked her path." I pulled out the chunk of ritual chalk Maria had pressed into my hand before we left. Soft white stone infused with protective symbols. As I marked our route, Dmitri's eyes followed my movements. "She used the same method," he said softly, "to find her way back. Except she never did." The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Our lights revealed scientific equipment scattered about, basic temperature gauges, old model recorders, film cameras, all positioned with careful precision, avoiding certain areas marked with Mansi warning symbols. "Someone's been documenting the phenomena," I said, examining a thermometer. The mercury had frozen solid. "Look at the placement," Dmitri pointed. "They're set up to monitor from a distance, like they knew which areas to avoid." The hair on the back of my neck rose. Dog whined, pressing closer. We pushed deeper into the complex. The hieroglyphs on the walls began forming patterns I recognized from Maria's translations. Warnings, containment symbols, prayers to forgotten gods. My flashlight beam caught something reflecting in the frost. A single black feather, perfectly preserved in the ice. The tunnel split. The right passage exhaled a breath of such profound cold, it made my teeth ache. Dog planted his feet, refusing to move toward it, his amber eyes fixed on the darkness, a low growl building in his chest. Left it is, I muttered. The left tunnel bore fresh marks, drag patterns in the frost, frozen footprints. Dog's nose worked the ground, leading us to a chamber that reeked of incense and fear. Candle stubs littered the floor alongside scattered papers and abandoned equipment. A ritual circle had been drawn and hastily smeared away. They left in a hurry, Dmitri observed. I examined the walls. Dark streaks marked where hands had clawed the stone. The cultists had fled something, or from something, their own bodies betraying them as Kholat Syakhl's influence took hold. The central chamber stole my breath. The stolen artifacts had been arranged in a perfect star pattern around a black stone altar. I recognized the configuration from the research. It matched the constellation that appeared every 64 years when the entity stirred. "This is wrong," Dmitri whispered. "These objects were meant to contain, not channel." In the ritual chamber beyond, the walls were covered in overlapping layers of Mansi script. I pulled out Maria's notes, comparing the symbols. The first layer used a numerical system based on temperature. The colder the symbol, the more significant its value. These interlinked with a second layer marking lunar phases. It's a code, I realized. The two systems together, they're instructions for awakening the entity. Dog's growl drew our attention to a pile of bones in the corner. Even bleached by time, they bore the same ritual mutilations as our recent victims. We found the military documents in a deeper gallery. Faded photographs showed uniformed men observing Mansi ceremonies, taking notes. The government had known about this place, studied it, used it. The cave system's library seemed chaos at first, books scattered without apparent order. Then I noticed the temperature markings on each spine, small numbers, carefully recorded. "Help me with these," I told Dmitri. "Arrange them by temperature, not title." When we finished, the pattern emerged. The first word of each marked page formed a message about the artifacts. The guardian statues channeled energy, the medallion focused it, and the texts contained the ritual words. Together, they formed a key to control the entity. A sound echoed through the tunnels, voices chanting in an ancient tongue. We pressed ourselves against the wall as robed figures passed, their skin marked by creeping patterns of frost. They carried more artifacts, moving with the jerky motions of deep, hypnotic trance. Dog trembled silently against my leg. The stolen medallion rested on a pedestal in the final chamber. The walls bore detailed instructions about Kholat Syakhl, overlaid with Sokolov's increasingly manic recent notes. The temperature had dropped so low, it hurt to breathe. "We need to leave," Dmitri whispered. "Now?" I nodded. We had what we came for, proof that something ancient was stirring, and that human hands were helping it wake. As we crept back toward the surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd crossed a line. Some knowledge wasn't meant to be found. Some doors weren't meant to be opened. But it was too late now. The entity was waking, and we were the only ones who knew how to stop it, if we could. Dog led us out through the twisting tunnels, past the ritual chambers and abandoned equipment, beyond the ancient warnings we'd ignored. The morning sun seemed alien after the cave's darkness, but the light brought no comfort, only the knowledge that while we'd been below, the first flakes of black snow had begun to fall. I watched a crystalline flake land on my trembling hand and melt into shadow. Time was running out. The entity was stirring, and we still didn't know who held the missing pieces of this deadly puzzle. But as I looked at Dmitri's haunted eyes and felt Dog press against my leg, I knew we'd ventured too deep to turn back now. The answers we sought lay somewhere in this web of ancient rituals and modern ambition. We just had to survive long enough to find them. The black snow made Vijay look like a daguerreotype negative, every familiar sight transformed into something alien and wrong. Dog pressed against my leg, his fur bristling as we watched another group of civilians take position at strategic points around the village center. Their movements betrayed years of military training, too precise, too coordinated. "Those aren't maintenance workers," Dmitri muttered, his weathered face tightening as he tracked their movements. He'd grown more haggard over the past days, the shadows under his eyes matching the darkness that seemed to seep from the very ground. Dog barked at a patch of empty air, backing away from something only he could see. The shadows around us writhed like living things, defying the one light that struggled through the crystalline blackness falling from above. I fought the tremor in my right hand by shoving it deep into my pocket. In the village square, a group of Mansi elders had formed a circle. Their chants carried on the wind, ancient syllables that made my teeth ache. The protective symbols they'd drawn on the frozen ground crackled and split, dark lines spreading through the ice like infected veins. "We need to find Nikolai," I said, watching another shadow move against the wind. "He knows more than he's telling." The police station squatted like a concrete tumor among the wooden buildings. Inside, we found Nikolai feeding documents into an ancient wood stove, his usual immaculate uniform wrinkled and stained. The acrid smell of burning paper filled the air. "Get out!" he snapped without looking up, but his voice lacked its usual authority. A half-empty bottle of vodka sat on his desk, alongside a scattered pile of photographs. I picked one up before he could stop me. The glossy surface showed a younger Nikolai, his face unlined, standing next to Sokolov. They were in front of some kind of altar, surrounded by men in military uniforms. The date stamp read 1989. "Interesting career change," I said, holding up the photo. "From secret agent to village cop." Nikolai's shoulders slumped. He grabbed the vodka bottle, took a long pull, and gestured toward the chairs facing his desk. His hands shook worse than mine. "It was supposed to be contained," he said, slumping into his chair. "We had protocols, safeguards. Sokolov was just supposed to observe and report." He waved at the window, where the black snow continued to fall. "Start from the beginning," I said. "I was young, ambitious. They told me it was a simple monitoring assignment. Watch Sokolov, make sure he stayed within parameters, report any anomalies." Nikolai poured himself another drink. But then he started changing. The ice patterns on his skin, the whispering in that damned language. I filed report after report. They ignored me, then demoted me, told me to keep watching, keep quiet. He pulled out another photograph, this one showing a group of researchers performing some kind of ritual. In the background, barely visible, stood Viktor Petrov, watching everything with predatory intensity. Victor was always there, always watching. He'd ask questions about the cycles, the rituals. I should have seen it then. A howl echoed from somewhere in the village. Not a dog, not anything natural. Nikolai flinched. "The next ritual is at dawn," he said, pulling out a stack of saved documents. "In the sacred grove." Victor's been obsessed with that site for years. The papers detailed precise astronomical alignments, thermal readings, and ritual requirements. Diagrams showed the sacred grove stone circle, with annotations in Victor's neat handwriting, calculating angles and energies with mathematical precision. We left Nikolai with his bottle and his guilt, heading toward the grove through the thickening darkness. Dog led the way, his black fur dusted with crystalline snow that refused to melt. The closer we got, the colder the air became, until each breath felt like swallowing glass. The cultists stood in a perfect circle around the ancient stones, swaying slightly. Their skin glowed with familiar ice patterns, their whispered chants forming harmonies that made my skull vibrate. At the center, Sokolov worked frantically at a makeshift altar, surrounded by the stolen artifacts. His movements were jerky, desperate. The military observers stood back in the shadows, watching impassively. I could taste metal in the air, feel the weight of ancient power pressing down. Dog pressed against my leg, trembling but silent. We crept closer, using the standing stones for cover. Sokolov's voice carried clearly in the unnatural stillness, switching between Russian and the other language, the one that hurt to hear. His skin was a maze of glowing ice patterns, and he looked decades older than when I'd last seen him. His hands shook as he arranged and rearranged the artifacts according to some pattern only he could see. When I stepped into the circle, the cultists didn't react. Their eyes were solid white with frost, their bodies swaying to rhythms beyond human perception. Sokolov looked up, and his smile held more relief than surprise. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking like thin ice. "Every experiment, every test, it was all designed to strengthen it. We were all just tools, preparations for its awakening." He held up his research notes with trembling hands. The ice patterns on his skin pulsed in time with his racing heart. Movement caught my eye. Victor emerged from the shadows like he'd been born from them, his body covered in ancient symbols that writhed and shifted across his skin. Gone was the meek assistant. This was something older, colder, wearing Victor's flesh like an ill-fitting suit. "Thank you, Doctor," Victor said, his voice carrying harmonics that made my teeth vibrate. "Your role is complete." The gunshot was surprisingly quiet. Sokolov's body crumpled, then began to disintegrate, breaking apart into swirling flakes of black snow. The cultists collapsed like puppets with cut strings. Victor's smile was triumphant as he backed into the darkness, leaving behind only the echoes of ancient words and the smell of steel and snow. Dog growled at the space where Victor had stood, but even he wouldn't approach it. The black snow fell harder, carrying within it whispers of something vast and cold and hungry, stirring from its long sleep beneath the mountain. Dmitri touched my shoulder, his face grave. "We need to warn Maria. If Victor has the artifacts and the knowledge from Sokolov's research." I nodded, but my eyes were drawn to the mountain looming above us. In the swirling darkness, I could have sworn I saw something move across its face. Something huge and ancient and wrong, its edges fractal patterns of ice and shadow. The wind carried the sound of Victor's laughter, and with it came a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. the cold of vast, empty spaces between stars, of a universe that cared nothing for the warmth of life. The true cold that waited in the dark, patient and eternal. Dog whined, pressing closer against my leg. Above us, the black snow continued to fall, each flake a tiny mirror reflecting not our world, but something else, something waiting to break through. And somewhere in the darkness, Victor was preparing the final ritual that would let it in.